They are two of the dirtiest words in politics, and once again, they are on everyone's mind. Inflation and recession. Those can be government killers, and they're going to dominate the political debate when Parliament resumes later this month. Remember, in July, inflation hit 7.6%. That's still a 30-year high. And so under heavy pressure to get back to their target goal interest rate of 2%, the Bank of Canada has increased its rate by 2.25 percentage points since March. And later this week, by the way, they're set for another big increase. So, are we headed for a recession? Will inflation get under control? And what more can the federal government do to help? Let's find out. Joining me now, the former Bank of Canada Governor, Stephen Poloz. He's a special advisor at Osler's, and he's the author of the new book, The Next Age of Uncertainty. Well, good to see you.
Great to be here.
Good summer. People are freaking out still over the summer as they come back, and the big question is, are we heading into either a Canadian recession or a global recession? What's your view?
Well, we have all the ingredients of a global recession. We know that. It's possible still not to have one. I think what we really need, especially here, is more like an altitude adjustment, you know, where it's a little too much turbulence up here. And so we've got to get the economy running at a more stable pace, a lower level, and that means a bit of a slowdown at a time when inflation is high. People are going to call that stagflation, but that's actually the best path forward for us.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because on one hand, we just found out we had 3.3% growth. Some expected higher.
Yes.
It's supposed to go down to maybe 1.5% next year or soon. On the other hand, next week, the Bank of Canada is supposed to increase interest rates because inflation's at 7.6%, a 30-year high. Take us inside the bank now, because what would they be doing? Would they be saying, okay, wait a second, we had 3.3 growth, the economy's slowing down. If we have another major interest rate hike, could we kick us into a recession here and slow the economy too much?
The fact is the economy slowed already. The first interest rate rounds probably affected housing almost immediately. That's the part that's most sensitive to interest rates. And the thing is, we don't know how sensitive it is right now because debt is much higher than it was the last cycle. But I think the most important thing that's going on so far, Evan, is that higher energy costs are taking money out of everybody's pocket. They've got less money to spend on other things. And so the economy would slow down all by itself without interest rate rises. So you have those two effects operating at the same time. And that's going to be tough to sort out. That's a debate right there.
Right. Although it's interesting. So what does that do to the inflation number? Because it's still an ugly number at 7.6. Now, I know people say it's not as bad as the States or it's not as bad as the UK. Who cares? This is our country. This is what we're worried about. 7.6 is a 30-year high. It sucks.
Yeah.
How do they drive that down without smoking the economy?
Well, much of it will come down by itself. We've been over this before together. The rise in oil prices goes into the inflation mix, and it causes inflation to rise, but truly is a transitory or temporary effect. So that's already coming down because now oil prices are only 28% higher than they were a year ago. Soon they'll be below where they were a year ago, and so they'll reduce inflation. So as that happens, inflation will come down more or less by itself to a new level. I don't know what that level will be, but it'll be lower than the numbers we're talking about today. The rest is a question of, can it infect our economy as that bulge in inflation passes through? And that is something we have to guard against.
Okay, now we're talking about the monetary side, and just as folks understand, monetary policy is what the governor of the bank is in charge of. Fiscal policy is what the elected officials like the Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, in charge of. The accusation has been that on the fiscal side, they haven't done enough. They have let the inflation say, oh, it's global forces, we don't control it. It's monetary policy, we'll let the interest rates of the governor handle it. Should the government on the fiscal side be doing more to try to deal with the inflation issue?
Well, I would think that a year ago when we were looking at the fiscal situation, it looked like the economy was already running hot. And then you could have argued that probably it's not the right time to be running a deficit fiscal level because you're adding to the problem. That's the potential risk. It was a fairly modest deficit that was forecast, and now we know that actually it's not actually a deficit. It's probably a surplus. And so
they're just because just so people get it, the inflation, they're ripping in the revenues, the government.
That's right, but the economy has been stronger than the forecasters from Bay Street said it would be. And that's the forecast that goes into the budget. And so when the economy is stronger, that's of course got good news attached to it. But it also brings that fiscal thing into place. Now you can evaluate that they really were probably set up to be in a position of a surplus over the course of this time. Now, could they have reduced some areas of spending to take some of the pressure off the economy? Absolutely. That is a possible scenario that could have been followed. I wouldn't argue one way or the other, but it may have been of help.
This is complicated stuff for a lot of folks. I noticed something, and I'm sure you did. The Bank of Canada, who had been under heavy attack over credibility with high inflation rates, attacks from politicians like Mr. Poloz or Dr. Leslie Lewis, who said that the bank is, quote, printing money, that's what this program during COVID called quantitative easing, that's the technical term, was essentially printing money, and that printing money has caused inflation. And they said, we didn't print money. That's not what it is. First of all, what did you make of that? And can you explain what they mean and what they're trying to say right now?
Well, it is untrue in that characterization. What you're doing in that situation...
They're not printing money.
They're not printing money. Printing money, people conjures up the image of them printing the money and the government spending it and people having to accept it. That causes inflation. We all know that from the textbook. But in the space we were in a gigantic hole in the economy. What you're doing then is providing all the liquidity so the economy, people can swim across the hole in effect. And so that the economy comes out of that, then it's time to mop up that extra liquidity. And that's the phase the central banks are moving into.
But the liquidity is not printing money. They're buying bonds on the open market. They say, we're not printing money, we're buying bonds. So what does that mean?
Well, it means you're literally giving people the money that they want. It's not that they want to spend it. It's the liquidity that they want to hold. It makes everybody feel more comfortable. The company's got lots of cash in the till in case there's a more rocky road ahead and so on. And so you provide that, and that's just satisfying a demand at those really low interest rates that we had. But here's the next phase, what we call quantitative tightening, which is the opposite of quantitative easing.
Now.
Just beginning. The Fed is really engaging now in September, and so will the Bank of Canada. That's actually shrinking the central bank balance sheet.
I got to ask you an interesting political question, because you've attended the World Economic Forum at Davos. Stephen Harper did. I remember he announced, the seniors' pension change there. Many ministers have, both conservative, liberals. But you see in the papers every day, Mr. Poloz saying he will ban any member of his caucus from attending. Dr. Leslie Lewis says the same thing. There's this notion that somehow that forum has infiltrated governments, has influence that over elected officials, and therefore it's the elites kind of overruling democracy. As someone who's been there, when you hear this sort of anti-Davos stuff, what's your take on the World Economic Forum and this notion that suddenly a boogeyman?
Well, I think that's nonsense. Yes, I went 7 or 8 times, and it's a place where actually I found I could meet more Canadian companies in a couple of days than I could meet in probably a year worth of travel around the country, and talk about issues and learn from them. And furthermore, it's a convening place where business and policymakers talk and get issues out and learn from them. And so I don't know what is so sinister about that. I've always
this notion of Klaus Schwab penetrating government, that's what they quote.
Well, you know, I guess they just never penetrated me. I just saying, in terms of being there and learning from it and getting to know other people and understanding issues better, I think it was a very valuable thing for me to do. I'll say that much.
You'd go again?
I certainly would go again.
Governor, thanks. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, Evan. Thanks.